answer questions that you may have. My name is Peaches Valdez. I am the Dean of Admission here at Hamilton, and I'd like to welcome you all to the College Essay Writing Tips. And as I said, we're so glad that you're joining us. I am joined here with my colleagues who will be shortly introducing themselves. And in regards to my background, I've been at the Dean at Hamilton for 4 years, and this is my 22nd, 23rd year in higher education. So throughout that time frame, I have read a lot of college essays, good ones, some bad ones, but for the most part, some good ones. Brenna, Jack, I'm going to throw it to one of you.
Great. So I can go next. My name is Jack Nivison. I'm a senior assistant dean at Hamilton. This is my going on my 6th year, I think, in higher education. And I too have read quite a few essays, probably some fewer than Peaches has, but I've read quite a few as well. We're really excited to share some tips and advice, and I'll throw it over to Brenna.
Hi, everyone. My name is Brenna May. I'm also a Senior Assistant Dean of Admission here at Hamilton. I've been at Hamilton for 4 years, going on 5 years, but I've been in higher ed this will be my 8th year now. So definitely a lot of essays, excited to chat with all of you tonight. And yeah, thank you for being here.
And then we are also joined by our colleague, Cameron Siegel, who is assistant dean here, and he will be helping us manage the Q&A and the chat part of the conversation. So just to get started, the purpose of this session is just to answer a lot of the common questions, concerns, and worries you have about having to share your thoughts and who you are in your college essay. And just as remember that our advice is just advice. It's, the evaluation of essays is really subjective. The also writing of essays is going to be subjective because it's about you. It's about your particular story, which no one else will have. So in that, there are many ways to write the essay. And so we're hoping to give you some advice, some ways to approach it, depending on if you're one of those types of students who needs a little bit more time to maybe write a couple more drafts, or if you are someone who can, produce a beautiful essay over 24 hours. So we're going to just provide you some of our tips, but also share some information of what we think as admissions officers reviewing college essays. In the end, we all feel that you all have a really great essay in you, and we want to learn more about you. And I love that fact that essays are probably one of my most favorite parts of the application, and we'll talk a little bit about that more because we get to learn about you. We get to learn about your story specifically. So roadmap for the session, we're actually going to give you a little insight into our own essays. And give you a sense of how we approached it, but also what we were thinking at the time that we were writing them. We're also going to talk a little bit about how the essay fits in the overall application that you're going to submit to a college, and what are the things that we're looking for. We're going to move on to talk about picking a topic. And I know sometimes that is one of the hardest parts of what am I going to write about? You have so many things in your life that are impacting you and influencing the decisions you make. It's really hard to kind of narrow down to one. So we're going to help provide just a little bit of advice about how to pick a topic. We're going to go over some good essay examples of do's and don'ts, because there are always do's and don'ts during this process, and essays is one that we're going to share some tips about how to approach it, what to do, what to avoid. And then finally, just as a reminder, we want you to, add your questions to the Q&A, and both my colleagues here and also Cameron on the Q&A will also be answering them as well. Just as a reminder that we're going to be addressing questions about the overall college essay. So I would ask that you refrain from asking questions that are very specific to your own essay. And if you have questions about your specific essay, you are more than welcome to send an email to us. We'll put my colleagues will put their email addresses in the chat box. We'll also connect you with our admissions officers, and you can connect with your regional admission officer and ask questions. But definitely, I think the point and the purpose of this session is talk about the overarching questions that many of you may be having, or some of the concerns and worries or the excitement you have about writing your essay. So it's going to be a little bit more general. And so I'd ask that you refrain from asking too many specific questions about your specific topic. So I guess in regards to the short reflection of the essay, Jack, Brenna, do one of you want to go first and talk about, your own college essay? I know it was a while ago for both of you, but do you remember what you wrote about?
Yeah, so I do remember what I wrote about. I kind of started with this idea of, that I wanted to write about something that was unique to me, of course, and something that I could talk about in my essay in a very personal way. And the topic that I came up with was not ultimately the one I ended up using. And when I was in high school, I had very, very long hair. I still have very long hair, but it was even longer then. And my first essay was about my hair and how long it was and kind of how that was part of my identity. And to be completely honest, my mom, who was great, read it and said that was just not the essay that I should be submitting to colleges. She was very supportive in other ways, but she said, this doesn't tell me anything about you as a person. It's just an anecdote. And I think that was a really, really good note. And so what I ended up writing about was an activity that was really important to me in high school, which was playing tennis. So I wrote about the lessons that I learned from that sport and just kind of my journey there. And I think that was a better reflection of the type of community member that I would be in college, rather than just writing about a physical attribute that I had. Jack, what about you? What did you write about?
Yeah, it was kind of a long time ago. Like bring me back to like 2008, 2009. And when I was in high school and still now, as everyone knows, I was a really big movie fan. And so I was really obsessed with stories, and that's where my really passion for stories came from. So I ended up, like a lot of people, writing stories, but everyone's stories are unique to themselves. And so even if a lot of people are writing stories, nobody's writing one, similar stories to everyone else. It's always your unique voice that you're putting through there. So I was like, okay, it's my junior year English class, and one of our assignments was that we had to write our college essay. And so that's where I wrote mine. And I wrote about writing. I wrote about how, taking everyday stressors, like we all know from high school, and translating that into stories and content for some of these stories and novels, and and just plots that I was putting in there and characters. And at the time, I had really supportive parents and teachers that read over my essay. And so I think it was the best that I could do at that point. But I think that now looking back at it, I probably would have gone kind of with Brenna, that I think that was my first draft, of an idea. And I think that I would have wanted to see where my passion for stories really came from. And so I probably would have gone more in the direction of talking about my passion for movies and how this really influenced my life and my choices. And so maybe instead of writing about my stories, I'd write about how the stories of Pixar and Steven Spielberg really influenced me at that point. But it ended up being a pretty decent essay. But I think that that's just one of the things. And sometimes we get it on the first try. Sometimes you get it on the second or third or fourth tries. But Peaches, how about you? What was your essay like?
So I applied to college in the 90s, so mid 90s, and I'm first generation American college. So my parents were educated outside the US, and so they were really unfamiliar with the educational process here in the United States. And so the idea of writing a college essay wasn't something they were familiar with. And so my parents, though, they felt, hearing their colleagues, hearing my school saying, you need to come up with some great idea. And so what my parents did was, my older sister had just graduated from college. And so my parents said, we're going to send you Amtrakking across the United States for a summer before your senior year. And you are going to pick your idea from that. And I did go across the country, and I had a lot of really great experiences. But in the end, I eventually did not write about that trip, which my parents were very disappointed. They were like, seriously, we sent you Amtrakking across the country and you were not inspired by anything. And in the end, what I wrote about was an incident in high school where I grew up in a really rural town in Pennsylvania. My family was one of the only families of color. And there had been a sign posted above the water fountains. And I was like, really? This is what I'm engaging in my high school experiences. This is not what I want in college. And one of the things is, I actually wrote about an issue for me, and it was about how I saw college as being that opportunity to be welcomed into a community with like-minded individuals. I wanted to have diversity. I wanted to meet people from around the world. And that's kind of where my college essay was, because I was in this place of, I didn't want to be in a community where people didn't celebrate or respect difference. And that's what I had envisioned that college was all going to be like, is that everybody was going to be new and different. And that, in some ways it was a bit idealistic. And, but at the same time, it was where I was of growth. I was reaching a point where I thought, I need to do more. I need to go somewhere else. I need to be more. So in the end, it was a little bit more serious. Sorry, my lights just turned out. But it was also one that I felt really reflected where I was in regards to my maturity and where I was, just basically being prepared to leave. So leave the high school experience. But again, that was kind of heavy. But as you can see, like all these 3 different topics talk about different aspects of who we are. And I think that's one of the best pieces of the application, is that we get to see an essay in which we get to hear a story, a narrative about yourself that we will not hear from anyone else. So no one will, Brenna, if you had shared your hair essay, no one else, like that was distinctly about you. And Jack, your essay about movies and screenplay writing and your passion for, the idea of cinema. Those are things that are distinctly you. And that's where this fits in the application, is that this is where it kind of bridges and pulls everything about you together. So you will have so many other people talking about you in your application, your teachers, your counselor, mentors, coaches. But the essay is really that part where you get to talk about yourself, what you're proud about, what you've achieved, what you hope and aspire to do after you leave high school. And so I think when we look at it, we think about it as not only what has happened to you, what have you done, but based on your experience, how are you going to take those skill sets? How are you going to take those experiences and apply it to the next 4 years of college? And how is that going to influence your college experience? So I see it as a way of kind of really adding, really pulling together all those various pieces of the application and, putting it together in one little beautiful, amazing package that is distinctly about you as that student. I think the thing is also an opportunity for you to share information with us. We are not mind readers, even though we try very hard. We are definitely not mind readers. So if you have something to tell us and you want us to know something about you, context is really important. So you can use the essay as an opportunity to share that information with us. It's an opportunity to tell us information that may not be appropriate for the additional information section, but you feel like this is something that is important for us to know about you as a person and as a future member of our community. Some students in the past, especially the last 2 years, have either used the college essay or the additional short answer essays to talk about how COVID has impacted them. But there is a COVID essay that you can use as well. But the idea is it's all about telling that narrative of who you are as a person, what you hope to do in the future, and how you'll grow through the next journey of your life as a college student. What's great is that it is also an opportunity to share yourself as a human being. You as a student are a human. You're writing this essay, you're putting this application together. We are readers, and we are also human. This is a human process, and knowing that the story that you tell us is something that's going to be read by someone who may or may not be able to relate, but has appreciation of the story that you're telling. And so Jack, can you talk a little bit about what we're looking for in an essay?
Sure. Yeah. Just like, going off of what Peaches said, it's really the only guaranteed required spot in the application where you get to speak directly to us. I mean, to use some of the things that Peaches talked about, yes, you can put information in the additional information sections or the community disruption sections, but you don't have to. And so this is one of the only required spaces where you get to introduce yourself, because your teachers are going to talk about your transcript is going to have your grades in your classes. You're going to list your activities. But this is an opportunity to bring some facets of your application to life. So we read that, in Brenna's example, we would see that she is involved in tennis. But through her essay, we can see the impact that tennis has, or the lessons that you've learned from tennis. We might see, from your class choices, that you're really invested in math. And maybe you talk about math, or maybe you talk about your path through high school, and we see that passion for math come through. And so it's a way for us to get to know you a little bit better. And when I say and there's and we're going to talk about topics next, but there was a question in the Q&A, I think, about about are there any kind of well-written essays that simply just don't work? Grammatically, they're perfect, word choice, syntax, whatever it is. And I would say, my biggest piece of advice about your essay is to make it about yourself. You want to get to know you. We don't want to get to know other people. If we get to know other people through getting to know you, then that's kind of that's kind of gravy. Like, that's kind of like, that's an added benefit. But like, if your essay is about like, your relationship with a mentor or a hero, we've read a lot of really well-written essays about those types of people, but sometimes they skew too far into talking about the other person rather than yourself. And so that's an example of an essay that like, we've all read that is really, that can be really well written. They could have proper grammar, structure, whatever it is, but just doesn't work because at the end of it, we're like, okay, if I read about my hero, who's like, is, I'll just say Steven Spielberg, you learn a lot about him, but it's like a biography of him. It's not a biography of you. And so, but to have it be about yourself, it's through like, the topic, which we'll talk about, but it's also through your voice. Like, we want to get to know your voice through there. We know that you are a teenager. We know that you're a high schooler. We're not expecting like, polished writing, like, necessarily. We're not expecting like the next great novel to come out of your college essay, but we're looking for like, your voice to come through, like, and I always say like, if you're funny, be funny in your essay. If you're not funny, maybe don't try and crack jokes in your essay, like, but it's just about being yourself and having your voice come through in whatever fashion that is best for you to do. That being said, we can tell when an adult has overly edited your essay. It's great if you have a parent, guardian, teacher, counselor, whoever it is, who is willing and who is able to look over your essay, but don't make sure that in the edits that they're doing that you don't lose sight of your voice, that like, it is still your story that you're telling. It's still your written piece. They can provide some edits, and like the advice that we're giving to you today, it's just advice. You should just take it as advice. You shouldn't take it as like, oh, I definitely need to do this. If you feel that it's skewing more towards what their vision is rather than your vision, you don't have to do it. At the same time, going back to what I was talking about, we're not expecting like, terrifically like, terrific prose, but what we are looking for proper grammar, clarity, use that spell check, always use spell check. But also like, you might want to think about, oh, like, I'm overusing this word. Maybe I can find a different word to use it. Don't rely too heavily on that thesaurus. If you use that kind of diction in your everyday life and that's who you are, that's okay. But we will be able to tell if you're just seeing this word and highlighting it and clicking on thesaurus in Word or in Google Docs or something. And if we're getting puzzled by it, chances are you're getting puzzled by it too. So just make sure that you are, speaking in your own voice, using that proper structure. And I would say, like, in terms of structure, don't get too complicated. Like, if you think you have a really good hook, a really great idea, run with it. But don't try and be overly complicated just to be overly complicated. Like, this isn't like, Tenet or something like that, where it's just convoluted storylines going all over the place, to use another movie reference, I guess. But it's just like, if you think you have a great idea like that, roll with it. If you don't, there's nothing wrong with a strict beginning, middle, and end structure. But I think, like, we've kind of talked about, there's been some questions about topics in the Q&A. I think that a lot of people are wondering about topics, Brenna. So, like, how do you go about picking your topic?
Yeah, this is probably the most difficult part of writing your essay. And we always say that the most difficult time to actually choose a topic is when you sit down to write your essay and you're being confronted by that blank screen or that blank page. So to start off with, one of the pieces of advice that we give is, throughout your life, maybe starting right now, or maybe you've done this already, kind of keep a running list of funny or poignant moments that you come up with, or you think, oh, this happened today at school, and maybe I could extrapolate that into an essay topic. That can be a way to start navigating the idea of picking a topic. You can keep that on your phone, and then when you do sit down to write your essay, you've got a little list to look at already, and you don't just have a blank screen in front of you. But in terms of what you want to do, just like Jack and Peaches have shared already, you want to be personal, but you also want to be appropriate. Remember that we are professionals, but we're also strangers to you reading this essay. A lot of people ask if, oh, can I write about this? Can I write about that? And the answer is generally yes, you can write about it, but make sure that it is in that professional, kind of appropriate way, that you're comfortable having a stranger read that topic from you. It is a chance to talk about something that's unique to you, to tell us something that we wouldn't otherwise have known about you. But again, make sure it's accessible to the person who's reading it. I actually read an essay last year that was really, really well written, but it used a lot of references to Game of Thrones. I am a Game of Thrones fan, so I really, really enjoyed this essay. But I was reading it with one of my colleagues who has never seen a single episode of the show. So she read a little bit of it and said, I don't get these references. I don't understand these characters. So if she had been reading it all by herself, she wouldn't have had that knowledge of the pop culture that was necessary to really understand that essay. So that's kind of a small example, but keep that in mind if you're overly relying on references like that they might go over the head of the person who's reading it. One other tip that we give people when they're trying to figure out how to approach their essay is thinking about what makes you a better writer. And one of the biggest things is to be a good reader as well. So if you yourself are already a reader, or if you're trying to prep for your essay, you can pick up maybe an old favorite, pick up a novel that you love, watch a movie that you really love, and listen to the words and the language that they're using. That can also give you some inspiration when you're looking to write your own essay. There really are no perfect topics, and there's also no singularly bad topics. Any topic can be done well if it's handled correctly, if you're making it personal. We should be able, if at any point you want to decide whether your essay is personal enough to you, think about whether if you left your essay written down on a piece of paper in your high school without your name on it, somebody should be able to pick it up and read it and realize that it's about you based on the topic. So that's one way to kind of approach, is this personal enough or is this a little bit more general? Just to address a couple of really common example questions that we get asked, whether this is appropriate or is this okay to write about. One big thing that we get asked about is, can I write about an activity? Like I described, I wrote about tennis when I wrote my essay. And these can be really great, but it's also a pretty common essay choice. So if you are writing about an activity, whether it's a sport, whether it's volunteering, whether it's something else that you do, just make sure that it is very personal and it's not going to be seen as too general. Another example that we get asked about a lot is it okay to write about adversity of some kind in your essay? And another question is it expected to write about adversity? And it is absolutely okay to write about adversity, but we do not expect that at all. If you have faced adversity in your life and you are comfortable sharing that with us, and you think that's going to make for a good essay, absolutely, you can share that. But don't feel like you need to write about it. If you're not comfortable doing so, certainly don't push yourself to share that, because we know those can be very personal topics. And also, if you are just thinking about writing about adversity because you think it's what we want to read, I wouldn't recommend doing that, because you want to make sure that it's really authentic to who you are and what you're going to want to write about. So there's a lot more examples like that, but those are just two really common ones that we get asked about is it okay to write about this? Should I write about this? And the answer is generally, you can write about anything that you want as long as it is personal to you and you're really taking that personal approach to it.
Brenna, I think you're giving some really great pieces of advice about authenticity and about really kind of sharing that story that's going to be distinct to yourself. I think, as you mentioned earlier, there's so much stress placed on this essay of 650 words or less of who am I? And every time I talk to students, they're all trying to figure out that one essay that's going to make it. That is the one essay that no one else is going to write about. And unfortunately, I don't think there's such a thing. As I said, I've been reading essays for over 20 plus years, and I have read multiple essays about similar topics. But what makes them distinct is that their perspective, their personal story, that this is happening to them. So they could, there might be 5 essays about adversity, and they're all approaching it from different ways of how they would react to it, or a particular activity, or maybe there's a passion or a cause that they're focused on. Everyone is going to talk about that differently. And that's one of the great things about this. Jack was talking specifically about the idea of voice. One piece of advice I give students when they're writing their essays is to learn, if you truly have your voice, that your voice can be heard in the essay, is actually to read it out loud. I know it sounds a little weird, but when you read things out loud, you can determine whether or not you use these words on a normal basis. If this is the type of language you use, if the punctuation is correct, if it's the proper grammar. I actually still do it with emails, and I recommend it to my colleagues, in order, make sure that this truly sounds like you. Does it? You should read it out loud. So that's one of the things I always encourage students to do. The one thing to add on to Brenna's piece of advice, don't try to find a way to be gimmicky. or try too hard to make your essay stand out. If anything, that kind of just leads to more procrastination because you're trying to find something to write about. In the end, we want you to just tell us something about yourself that we may not see in depth or in more detail in other parts of the application. So it could be that activity that you're involved in, that community service project. It could be that the final game for an athletic event that you were participating in, but it's all about you specifically. I think you've probably heard this before, but if you're not traditionally a funny person, like you're not someone who can carry out jokes, then don't do that. If we've had a lot of failed attempts at humor when we clearly know that the student probably isn't, humor and telling jokes is probably not part of their traditional personality, and so you see them try and it doesn't go so well. Definitely the idea is starting, telling us something about who you are and just how you would explain it to someone that you just met. That's kind of the voice that we're thinking about, and that level of authenticity. Something about, I like to think about progression. It's about how you've grown over a period of time or how this experience has impacted you. You can talk about even things such as adversity. You may want to share about that incident, but how has it impacted you since then? Or how have you grown, or how have you learned? So the idea is movement throughout this essay of telling us a story. I think sometimes it's sometimes students will talk about their whole life. I was born and I'm going to go through kindergarten and middle school and high school and whatnot. We don't need to know that. The idea is taking a snapshot of your life. So think about your application as this, going back to the idea of where the essay fits in the application, consider it like a photo album. Like your essay is just one snapshot of this entire album that's going to tell and reinforce the story of who you are and why you'll be a great member of a particular community. So with that, thinking about your essay, this is definitely not a quick activity. You want to really approach it with the idea of time, in the sense of you may need to write multiple drafts. You need time to brainstorm. You need to try time to edit. You may want to share it with other people, but in the end, you should really focus on getting your ideas down, starting to write early, and then stepping away from the essay and then looking at it again with fresh eyes. So Brenna, can you actually give us some examples of essays that worked and maybe provide some opening sentences that caught our attention?
Yeah, for sure. So we do actually have a page on our website with some essays that worked. So all of you are more than welcome to check that out. And we would definitely encourage that. These are students who applied to Hamilton, were admitted to Hamilton, and enrolled at Hamilton. So these were essays that kind of made it all the way through the process. And one way to have your essay stand out is to have a really good opening sentence. This isn't an absolute necessity, but it is a way to kind of grab the reader's attention and make them want to read more. So we're going to share two examples from these essays that worked, of these opening sentences that we thought were particularly strong and why we like them so much. So the first one is as follows. When I was still small enough to fit in the sun-drenched space between the armoire and the couch, I sat cross-legged and spun the world. Very vivid imagery here. You can really picture what the person is doing when they were a child, but it also leaves you with a little bit of a question of where is this going? What does spun the world mean? That could be interpreted different ways. So if I read that, I would be really excited to continue reading and see where that sentence is going to take us. Jack, I think you have a second example.
Sure, yeah. This example is, it's 6:52 a.m. on a frosted over Friday in September, and my dad and I are running late as we wind down our steep hill to school. I mean, that can really go a lot of different ways. You really don't know what the topic is going to be. You don't know where it's kind of going, but kind of similar to Brenna's example, you have that vivid imagery. You are left with this, really rich text and detailed imagery. And it's left with okay, where's this going? Where are we going to? And so it really hooks you in while also not being kind of overly gimmicky in that way. It just flows really well, and it can kind of flow right into the rest of the essay there. And we also we've all said, we've all read a lot of different essays over the years, and so we all have kind of different ideas about or different kind of ones that stick out to us over the years. Peaches, do you want to give us an example of one that's really stayed with you?
Yes, essay was probably about 2 years ago. And it was, again, I think it addresses some of the comments that Jack and Brenna provided regarding their openings. And this one had really great imagery and it was funny, but it was a student. So I'm the admission officer for Hawaii. And so the essay starts telling the story about a student is passionate about the bagpipes. And the funny thing is that there are very few bagpipers in Honolulu. And it also happens to be that he is a very lanky, tall, ginger haired, so red haired kid who loves to play the massive bagpipes. And so when he talks about being in parades and dressing in the uniform of the kilt and carrying this bagpipe and doing parades in this tropical island, you have this vivid picture of what this student may look like. And then when he sent a video of him piping in Honolulu, I was like, oh my gosh, that is exactly what I was imagining. But it was a simple essay about some activity that he was involved in, but it was very distinct to him. And the fact that he was able to talk about why he loved the bagpipes was just, it's not necessarily a typical instrument students pick up, but to also know that he was doing it, which, on this beautiful tropical island where people normally don't have it, and to know that he's been able to find a community himself was it definitely stood out as a great essay.
So one of my favorites, which is actually from probably 6 or 7 years ago now, one of my first years in admission, so it's definitely stuck with me. This student wrote an essay about, she lived out in the country on kind of like a big farm estate, and she fell into an old well that she didn't know her family had on her property. She wasn't injured. It wasn't that kind of essay. It was about how she was stuck in this well for several hours where they had to get the fire department out there to get her out. There's really no other way out. And it could have been a sad essay. It could have been a funny essay, but it ended up being this really introspective essay about looking at the world from a pinpoint way down in this well and having a different perspective. And it was great because it did not go the way I expected when I read the initial part of the essay. And I really enjoyed that. Obviously, it stuck with me and very personal to that student. I can't say I know too many people have fallen into a well in real life.
Yeah. No, that's the only one I've ever heard of in an essay. So in terms of the one that's really stayed with me also is like from one of my first few years in admissions. It involved a young woman who lived in a more rural environment, and her family had farm animals, and they had chickens, and they accidentally bought a rooster one year, which I didn't know why that was such a big deal, but it's a very big deal apparently. And she and this rooster did not get along well at all, and they actually fought quite a bit. Apparently there was like a real back and forth between them. And so, but over the course of her essay and over the course of her time with this rooster, they found common ground, and they're able to accept each other for who they are and their differences and work to make a better environment. And so they had mutual standing respect, which kind of sounds ridiculous because you're talking about a rooster and a human, but I thought it was a really great way for us to get to know a little bit more about her. Her voice really came through in that. And also, it was just kind of like, a fun read. And when we talk about some of these topics, and Brenna's going to go into in a couple minutes about some overused topics, and we're getting some questions about that. We've had some questions in the chat, about how, there are topics that people are saying that are overused, like immigrations or sports stories. And do we think that's true? Or if we put our personality into the essays that find use topics like that, like Brenna said earlier, you can write about basically anything you want, so much as that, like Brenna said, if they walk down the hallway and you drop your essay and someone finds it, they'll say, okay, this is Brenna's essay. I can see this coming through. If you make it about you and your personality and your voice, you can write about basically anything you want. And as Peaches was kind of talking about earlier, there's a question about do you have any advice for essay questions that are specific to colleges? What's your favorite song? Write about your favorite song. If it's I'm not ashamed. My favorite song of all times, I Want It That Way by the Backstreet Boys. And I'm going to talk about I Want It That Way by the Backstreet Boys. If that's your favorite song, write about it. If it's not your favorite song, don't write about I Want It That Way. Write about something else. And there's also a question about do you have to write about a specific event that's affected you, or could you write about an action that's affected you? Maybe that's something in the world or something that you've seen from friends or family members. Right. If that has really shaped you, if we can see growth from that, if we can get a look into your personality, definitely write about that. And then another one before we go into some of those more overused topics is about quotes. Is that an issue with plagiarism? no, like, that's not really an issue with plagiarism. If you properly cite that this quote is from, Eleanor Roosevelt, then, like, great, you can say that it's from Eleanor Roosevelt. If you just write it in there without the quotes, maybe one of us would be like, that sounds like something I've heard in a speech before. So definitely, definitely make sure that you're properly citing things if you are using quotes from other things. And, like, there was also something about getting the essay under 650 words. I think you're just going to have to edit, and make sure that you can get it down to that tight 650 words. And I'm hesitant to give kind of advice about editing because everyone edits differently, and what works for me will not work for you. So, but on that, like, Brenna, are there any essay topics that, like, are kind of overused that we see quite a bit?
Yeah, for sure. And again, just a disclaimer that you really can write about anything that you want. We're not dissuading you from using these topics, but these might be ones where you want to take a little bit more care in making it personal because you're recognizing the fact that other people may also be writing about something similar. And we've touched on these already, but one of them is the activity essay. Again, the one that I wrote for college, which is this is the activity that I do in high school, and this is how much it's impacted me. We see that a lot, whether it's athletics, service, a hobby, but there are absolutely ways to make it personal. Another one that Jack referenced earlier is the essay that's really about somebody else, an essay that is about your hero, or an essay that you've written for English class that's like a biography of someone. If it's not about you, we don't really want to see it. We want to see how those topics have impacted you. If we read too much about your grandma, we're going to want grandma to come to Hamilton rather than you. One of the ones we also see, and this kind of goes towards the fitting it under 650 words, is the trying to fit too many topics into one essay. I think this is a common thing because you do want to show so many aspects of your personality, and we can absolutely empathize with that. But in order to fit it under that word count, if you're trying to do a list of topics or a list of objects or a list of events or something like that, you might need to cut it down by one or two just to make sure that it's going to fit within that. And we want more context surrounding these things. We don't just want a list. And then the last one that we'll mention is one that we kind of like to call the meta essay. And this is the essay about writing the college essay. We read this a couple of times per year, where it starts off something like, I'm sitting here writing my college essay and I don't know what to write about, so I'm going to write about my college essay, something kind of circular like that. And again, this could be really, really phenomenal if you take it in a different direction, but we do see that one every, I would say once or twice per year. So I know we actually wanted to share our screen right now to give you a visual for this next part. So I'll do that. Peaches, if you want to kick it off.
Sure. So what we are going to be going through is some just general do's and don'ts as you approach the essay. And I think a lot of this has actually been captured in what we've already been discussing, but I know that some people, you may or may not be taking notes. And so this is actually a really great summary of some of the things that we've addressed. So, so Brenna's going to share her screen and then we will start.
I might be sharing my screen.
Okay, you are sharing your screen.
Excellent. There we go. There we go.
Great. There we go.
Okay. So the first do is to write about what interests you. I hope that we've carried that over throughout this entire conversation. It should always be the comment of what do I want to share with you, and not what do I think admissions officers want to read. Again, this is all about you. This is your narrative. And so you should really focus on what do you want to share with an admissions office about who you are.
Right. And our first don't is try to be what you think that we want. There was a question that was in the chat, are there any essay topics that we should not do? No. Basically, like we've said, if you leave here with one thing, it's these first two lines. It's write about what interests you. Don't try to be what you think that we want. Hamilton, we do, as you might know, we have this emphasis on writing. Don't just write about writing. If you think, oh, Hamilton has an emphasis on writing, this is what they want to see. We only want to see that if that's what you are genuinely passionate about.
The next do is to remember your audience. This goes back to something that we said before, that we want to get to know you, but we are strangers. So if it is something where you wouldn't be comfortable telling a stranger on the street this story, I probably would hesitate to write my college essay about that, because again, you don't you don't know the person who's on the other end. We try our very best to be very empathetic, to be unbiased, but we are humans, and we want to make sure that the essay topic is appropriate for the professional environment in which you're submitting it.
So don't let it be over edited or lose your voice in the process. I know that there was a question in the Q&A about how many people you should have read this essay. And I know that Brenna had already noted that you don't want to lose your voice and you want this to be told by you. And if you left it in the hallway, would people know who it was? And my comment was about, reading it out loud to make sure it still sounds like you. And so one of the things that there isn't an exact number, like I would not say, okay, you need 2 to 3 people reading it. But one thing is that you may want to have a teacher that you admire or that you really like, or maybe you're a school counselor that you are working with to read your essay, just because that is the level of formality. So you could see us almost as an equivalent of a teacher or a school counselor who will be reading this. So we're getting to know you. We're not super close, but the idea is that we are someone who is going to be helping you throughout a process. And so think about that level of formality as a teacher or school counselor, and maybe have one of them take a look at your essay. But you don't want to have too many hands on it, too many sets of eyes, because then it starts losing your particular voice throughout the process.
So the next one, that we've also kind of talked about quite a bit, is to tell a story. Tell us your story, and don't worry if your topic kind of blend, might be the same as student X as student Y. Your story is your own voice. It's your own story. So just make sure that, there are sometimes another example of maybe essays that might not work as well as others, or are the, I kind of call the academic essays, the essays that you might see in your history class or your English class or science class or something. If you really want to talk about a topic that you're really invested in your classes, great, write about it, but make sure you inject yourself in there and tell us your story with that topic, rather than just providing us with kind of a rundown of facts and figures instead.
This again goes back to the idea of audience, but don't forget this is a personal essay. We don't want to read an academic paper. We want to get to know you as a person. And we do see students who have submitted something to us where it seems like they might have written it for a class at some point and they're using that for their college essay. In certain circumstances, that might work really well. But if it is truly an academic paper that you're writing about, the history of Genghis Khan or something like that, it's not going to tell us a whole bunch about you. So this is a personal essay, and that's something that's important to remember.
So this is the show rather than tell. Again, it's one of those things about, the idea of providing context, taking us along the story with you, taking us along that ride as you explain what is going on. So providing examples, anecdotes. The idea is not just saying, I did this, but you may want to say, for example, if you had traveled abroad, it's I went to Tibet. Okay, that's great. Thank you. That's an action. But maybe it's I decided to travel with Where They Be Dragons. And the idea, I planned on hiking in Nepal or something to that effect. But the idea is you want to bring us on this story. You want it to be engaging. You want to give examples, details to keep us, give us insight into the whole experience, the whole instance that you want. Again, it's telling that longer story of that one experience that you want to share with us. So, make sure that you provide additional context and examples and anecdotes as part of that process.
This is something that we talked about earlier as well, but just to make sure this point is clear, don't overuse a thesaurus. So don't just do the copy and paste. Don't just use those big words or obscure words just because we're going to think, oh, this sounds really cool. This sounds like very intellectual. Sometimes you can really lose your story. You can lose your voice in those things, and you can lose how personal this essay is to you. At the same time, kind of going back to what Peaches just said, don't be too vague. It's the whole show don't tell thing. Tell us about your trip, to Nepal, rather than saying, I went to Nepal. It's like, okay, great. But tell us more about this. So make sure that you're being specific in this as well.
We want you to relate your essay to who you are now. We do get quite a few essays that are about a student's childhood, and these can be really fantastic. But if they're just about your childhood, if they're just about who you were in kindergarten, that's hard to relate, for us to relate to who the student is right now. So if you are going to write about an incident from a long time ago, make sure that you're also relating that to who you are as a person today, maybe who you'll be in college, or some kind of growth in there. Don't let it just be about the past.
Don't be afraid to start over. So there's actually a question in the Q&A about, should you write multiple essays for each of the topics that you're thinking of possibly addressing? I would actually not do that. And I think because it takes up a lot of time. Again, it's the idea of, what you should do is totally feel comfortable about doing a brain dump. But maybe pick one of those essays where, again, we're not going to, it's going to be that great opening in which we're going to learn something about you where we haven't learned before. The idea, and if it doesn't work out, like if you get through it and you write that essay and you're really like thinking at the end, this doesn't really represent who I am. I'm not feeling very comfortable. I don't think this is a strong representation of who I am. Then start over again. But the idea is, this is not something, unless you're a Pulitzer Prize writer, this is not going to come easy. And that's okay. We're not expecting perfection, but at the same time, we want you to be certain that what you share with us is truly what you want us to know about who you are as a student. So don't be afraid about starting over if that's necessary.
Yeah, a definite do here is something that we've said multiple times, but definitely do it, is proofread early, often, and out loud. So if you're the person that is going to do the multiple drafts, proofread those multiple drafts. If you're the person that's going to do it in 24 hours before you hit submit, just make sure you proofread it. And going back to what Peach just said, read it out loud. It's really helpful for hearing your voice, something that I do sometimes. And this is something that a creative writing professor taught me when she told me, to any time that one of my stories, if I think that it's being cliched or melodramatic, to raise my hand, and I ended up raising my hand for the entire thing. And so you could translate that to anytime you're reading it and it doesn't sound like you, raise your hand. And if your hand stays down for most of the time, you've got your story, you've got your voice. If it stays up for the whole time, that's when you might want to go back to the drawing board and redoing those drafts. But just make sure you proofread early, often, and read it out loud, because it can be really helpful.
To that end, don't procrastinate. We do want you to leave some time for this editing process. We know that there are students out there who can knock out a really fantastic essay in 24 hours, but that is not most people. So if you're able to start your essay early, if you're a rising senior right now and you want to start fiddling with that idea of an essay topic right now, that might be a good idea, because that gives you a lot of wiggle room and you feel a lot less pressure. So make sure you take that time to think of a great essay topic, and then also give you that time to write it and proofread it.
I think the most important piece is that we are on your side. We are excited to learn more about you. As I said, one of my favorite parts of the application is the essay, because I get to hear you specifically, and to know that whether you write about an activity or about a person who's inspired you, or some academic interests that you have, all of those are going to be exciting in the end, because they're all distinctly about you, and that's your story. And just so you know that everyone's going to approach this differently. There was someone who wrote in the chat that they wrote a couple different versions, and it kind of worked. For some people that may not work. Some people might like to do a brain dump. Some people may like to do an outline. But again, it's all about your own process. And in the end, what you write is going to, and share with us, is going to be really important, because that's going to tell your distinct story to us. Okay, so we have a couple more things that we want to address, and one thing is about individual college supplements. And I know that there was a question in the Q&A specifically about the Hamilton essay. And again, this is, I think schools are going to be asking these questions because we want to learn more about you, about why you're interested in a particular institution. Just as a reminder that, the application that you use, whether that's the Common application, the Coalition application, the QuestBridge application, all of those are kind of general essays about an aspect of who you are, a story that you're wanting to share with us. The college specific essays or the supplemental essays, those are ones that give us a better sense of why you're interested in X institution. Why are you interested? Tell us something even more distinct and unique about who you are. And schools will handle it very differently. There will be ones that are very specific about the college. There might be something a little bit more quirky, like what's the answer to pie? And it's how do you answer that? It may be about, I like cherry pie, I like apple pie, or it's the actual numerical pie. So, I think it gives an opportunity for people to be creative. So I think the thing is that these are going to be a little bit more, because they're not specifically about, they're not asking you about specific aspect of your life. They might be asking more of, how is this going to influence you, how you're going to be at an institution, or tell us something that we're not going to find out in anywhere else in the application. It could be personal and could not be personal, but in the end, or super personal, excuse me. But in the end, it's helping an admission officer still build a bigger story of who you are, and in the end, determining whether or not you're going to be a good fit for that institution. One piece of advice I always give students is that you need to spend the same amount of time on this essay as you do on your big college essay. I think students spend so much time on their college essay, and when they see the supplemental essay, they do a quick write up of it. And they answer the question very quickly. They don't pay attention to some of the things that we've been saying, things about grammar and clarity and punctuation. And sometimes these types of essays also give us a better indication of how you are as a writer, because it's a little bit more natural. But the idea is you still need to, you should still proof it. You should still answer the question. You should read the question, definitely, and take time to make sure that you are, you're applying the same skills, you're applying the same review that you would to that big college essay. And then finally, as I said, pay attention to the prompt. I think there are many times where we know what the prompt is, and students write nothing about it. So they write something completely different. And then we realize, oh, wait, we think that this might, for all of us, we've had multiple years in this profession. We may think, and we may know that this is the prompt for another institution. So, so as a reminder, just read the prompt, because I think that'll give you, because in the end, it'll give the admissions officers a better sense of who you are and how you're going to be a good fit for the institution.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the questions in the chat, which is, there's anything that we should avoid, or what should students mention? Definitely one thing to avoid, probably the only thing to avoid, is calling the institution that you're submitting it to a different name. So if you're submitting it to Hamilton, make sure it says Hamilton when you hit submit, because it has happened in the past where it does not said Hamilton there. And and in the about things to mention, kind of what Pete just said, there is no best thing to mention. It is just read the prompt and how you respond to the prompt, and how you what is your authentic thoughts about it. Don't just write what you think we want us to say. Write about what you want to talk about for that particular institution.
Mm-hmm. Great, thanks. Any other pieces of advice about the additional essays, Brenna?
I would say the only thing to add, very much to Jack's point, just kind of extrapolating a little bit, is obviously avoid mentioning other colleges in our Why Hamilton essay. But it's also important to be pretty specific in an essay like that. We're asking you why Hamilton is the right fit for you. So if we're reading something in that essay that indicates to us that you haven't done a lot of research about Hamilton, or maybe you are confusing us with another college. I've read essays before that say, I'd like to go to Hamilton because it's in New York City. We're not in New York City. So that kind of tells me that it might be for another college, or you've confused us, just there's some confusion there. And it might tell me that you're not as interested in Hamilton as I might want you to be. So, things like that are important to look out for too.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Brenna. Thanks, Jack. I think definitely in the end, I feel like we've covered a lot of different aspects of the college essay this evening. And in the end, I think some of the highlights to reinforce is that a lot of, we want authenticity, we want voice. And in the end, all of you have that. You all have that story within you to share with us. And you definitely have the resources available in the sense of, we provide writing tips, but also you have your school community members, you have family members, you have friends within your community who will be able to read these essays about you to say, does this sound like me? Is this what I would want to share with a college? So, know that you've got this. You just need to take some time dedicate a little bit of time per week just to think about this essay, get your ideas down and start writing, because in the end you have a good story in you, and it's the story you want to tell to college and university about who you are and why you'd be a good fit for that institution. And so definitely, I know that my colleague Cameron had put the links in the chat, specifically to our writing prompts, also our writing tips, some sample essays that worked. And so feel free to visit those just to get a sense of what students have written. Again, these aren't perfect essays, but they're really great stories about who individual students are and why they would be a good fit at an institution like Hamilton. And so we have a little bit more time to answer some questions. So, Brenna and Jack, I'm going to throw some topics to you all, but are there, how do you show, this is an interesting one. How can you show intellectual vitality through a personal statement?
It's a really good question.
Yeah.
I think that can be a goal. That might be the goal of your essay, is to show your intellectual vitality and show that you're a very intellectual person. It doesn't have to be the goal. I think that that's important to note, that if you're having trouble conveying that, or you think that, oh, that's not really who I am as a person, or something like that, I wouldn't worry too much about really trying to convey that. But if you're really trying to put that forth, you're trying to show that you're going to be a good academic contribution to Hamilton's community, or to any college's community, you can absolutely write about academic experiences that you've had, or intellectual thoughts that you have in the classroom when you're in high school, or there are ways to put that through. I would just caution to say that that's not always the goal of the personal essay. It's more about wanting to get to know the person in their authentic self.
Great, perfect. So there's a great question that I would love to ask you, Jack, to answer. So what questions do you ask yourself while reading an essay? For example, do you think about the student's personal qualities and how they'll contribute to the college?
Yeah, I mean, I think that this also goes along with another question, which is like, how much weight does an essay have in an application? And like, we have a really comprehensive review process. So like, transcripts are obviously going to be the most important things with us, like, in academics, like, that you're doing well in those classes, you're challenging yourself. We're also looking at, like, I think Brenna mentioned this earlier, fit with the college, like, how would the student fit with our community? What will they contribute to the community? And so, yeah, I think that some of the questions that we're asking are things like that, like, is this someone that will, like, really take advantage of all the different opportunities that they have to engage with others on campus? And, being involved on campus doesn't mean you're involved in a dozen different things. It means you just want to be part of a larger dialogue on campus. So that's some of the questions that I ask, like, is this student, like, will this student, like, want to seek out these opportunities? Will they want to be engaged with their community members? And like, I think there was another question that was like, is there anything as too serious of an essay? Like, and the answer is no. Like, if you're a serious person, like, trust me, there are other serious people on campus too. And so, like, I don't think that there's anything like, too serious. There's nothing too light necessarily. It's just about, like, what Pete just said, being your authentic self. And so I think that, like, in terms of the weight that the essay holds in the application process, it's definitely important. Like, it's definitely important. And those are some of the questions that we ask as we're looking through the essay process as well.
Mm-hmm. Great, perfect. So there was a question that I would love to answer, and it is, would it sound like I'm bragging if I talk about my accomplishments, even if they connect to my essay's main ideas? I really like that question. And I honestly, I don't think it's bragging. I think it's stating a fact. It's stating what you've accomplished. If anything, you should take pride in that and share that information with us. So especially if they connect with the essay's ideas that you want to convey to us. So definitely feel comfortable about sharing and taking pride in your achievements. I think this is not a time, the college process is not a time for you to be modest in your achievements. There's a difference if you did not achieve these great recognition, this great recognition, that's a different story. But if you've accomplished and you've achieved a certain level of recognition for academics or athletics, for artistry, then share that with us, because again, it gives us insight into who you are as a person. So don't feel like you're bragging. This is not a time to be modest about your success, your successes. So please share that with us in your essay. There was a question about more of a practical question, which was about the essay expressing why you're interested in Hamilton. So does someone want to answer? They said that they didn't see it. So can someone explain?
Yeah, I
Sure.
can totally explain. There's probably a reason you don't see it. It's because it's not on the Common App. So you might think of a supplemental essay as living on the Common App or the Coalition app, but Hamilton's is just structured a little bit differently. So you will be able to access that short answer question after you submit your application. So you send us the Common App or the Coalition app or the QuestBridge app, and afterwards you get access to your online Hamilton applicant portal. And then in that portal, you'll have the opportunity to write this very short 250-word statement about why Hamilton is the right fit for you. Even if you apply on the deadline itself, you will have a couple of weeks after the deadline to submit that. So don't worry about that. We're not going to cut it off that day or anything like that. So you will not see it on the Common App itself, but you will see it in your portal after you've already applied. So you can take some time at that point to consider what you'd like to write about.
Perfect. Great. Well, thank you very much, Brenna and Jack, for joining me this evening. Thanks to everyone who joined us. Some really great questions. Just so you know that this is being recorded and it will be posted online. So if you had to step away, or if you wanted if you wanted to recap it again, or maybe take a screenshot of the shared screen that Brenna did, definitely we'll make that available to you all. But again, thank you so much for your some great questions. We really enjoyed hearing about what you're thinking about in regards to your essays. Please know again that you have a great essay in you. We're looking forward to learning more about you through this process. Have a great evening, and don't hesitate to be in touch with the admission office if you have any other questions. Take care. Have a great evening.
Night.